The radio crackled with static in Sarah Mason's kitchen, its urgent warning cutting through the peaceful Montana morning. 6 armed and dangerous prisoners have escaped from Sterling Maximum Security Prison. Citizens are advised to stay alert and report any suspicious activity. Sarah's weathered hands never paused as she continued cleaning her hidden collection of custom revolvers, each one meticulously maintained and deadly accurate. 10 years of solitude on her family's ranch had done nothing to dull her legendary speed, a reputation earned in her younger days that few now remembered. The morning sun caught the silver barrel of her favorite Colt, its pearl handle worn smooth from years of practice. Those escaped prisoners would be looking for somewhere remote to hide, somewhere they thought would be an easy target. They'd find her ranch soon enough. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mason's boots crunched across the frost-covered ground as she made her morning rounds. The sprawling ranch spread out before her, 3,000 acres of Montana wilderness that had been in her family for 4 generations. Dawn painted the distant mountains gold, their snow-capped peaks standing sentinel over the valley below. At 43, Sarah wore her years with quiet dignity. Her dark hair, streaked with occasional silver, was tied back in a practical braid. Her face, tanned from years of outdoor work, carried laugh lines around her eyes, though those who knew her past might wonder about the harder lines around her mouth. Thunder, her black stallion, nickered softly as she entered the stable. "Morning, old friend," she murmured, running practiced hands over his legs, checking for any signs of trouble. The horse had been with her for 12 years, as reliable as the revolvers she kept hidden throughout the ranch. In town, they knew her as the quiet rancher who ran the Mason spread with skilled efficiency. Few remembered the young woman who'd made headlines 20 years ago, winning shooting competitions across the West with supernatural speed and accuracy. Fewer still knew about her work with law enforcement, training their top marksmen in techniques her father had passed down through generations. The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. Bill Cooper, her nearest neighbor at 5 miles out, rode up to the fence line. His expression carried worry beneath his usual friendly smile. "Heard the news about Sterling?" he called out, keeping his voice low despite the distance to the next ranch. "Sheriff's got everyone on alert. Those prisoners, they're bad ones, Sarah. Real bad." Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Appreciate the warning, Bill. I'll keep an eye out." "You shouldn't be out here alone," he pressed. "Why not come stay in town until they're caught? Rachel would love to have you." "Ranch needs tending," Sarah replied simply. "Stock won't feed itself." Bill's face creased with concern. "At least take my spare shotgun. I know you're not much for guns, but—" Sarah cut him off with a gentle smile. "I'll be fine, Bill. Really." After he'd ridden off, Sarah returned to the barn, sliding back a hidden panel to check one of her many weapon caches. The custom Colt gleamed in the morning light, along with spare ammunition and cleaning supplies. Similar hideaways were scattered throughout the ranch, in the house, the workshed, even the old grain silo. She'd learned early from her father, it wasn't enough to be fast. You had to be prepared, had to have options. "A gunfighter without a gun," he used to say, "is just a target." The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Sarah tended the horses, checked fences and monitored the cattle in the north pasture, but her movements held an extra alertness now, her eyes scanning the horizon more frequently. She noted the places where the tall grass moved against the wind, marked the distant dust clouds that might signal riders. Around noon, she rode Thunder up to the ridge that overlooked the main road. 3 sets of tire tracks marked the dirt, unusual for this remote stretch. One was Bill's truck, but the others were unfamiliar. Someone was scouting the area. Back at the ranch house, Sarah began her preparations. To casual observers, nothing would seem amiss. But every movement served a purpose. The hay bales she moved provided clear lines of fire. The tools she left out could become weapons. Even the way she parked her truck offered both cover and a potential escape route. Inside, she opened an old trunk in her bedroom. Beneath family photos and worn quilts lay the legacy of the Mason family. Gun belts, holsters, and ammunition her father had crafted by hand. She lifted out a worn leather journal filled with his teachings, wisdom earned through years of gunfighting in a wilder West. "Speed is good," one passage read, "but patience is better. Let them underestimate you. Let them think they have the advantage. The greatest weapon is the one they don't know you have." Sarah ran her fingers over the familiar words, remembering the hours spent practicing, the countless rounds fired until every movement was instinct. She'd walked away from that life, chosen the quiet of the ranch over the reputation she'd built, but she hadn't forgotten, hadn't lost the edge that made her famous in certain circles. The sun was setting when she heard the first distant engine, someone testing the back roads, looking for isolated targets. Sarah calmly finished her coffee on the porch, every sense alert despite her relaxed posture. In the growing darkness, her ranch would look perfect to desperate men, remote, seemingly defenseless, run by a single woman they'd see as easy prey. Let them come, she thought, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Let them think they've found their sanctuary. They'd learn soon enough why the old-timers still spoke of Sarah Mason in whispers. Sheriff Tom Riley's truck kicked up dust as it rumbled down Sarah's driveway the next morning. She watched his approach from the barn, noting how his usual easy manner had been replaced by rigid alertness. 25 years wearing the badge had taught him when trouble was coming. "Got some specifics on our escapees," he said without preamble, joining her in the barn shade. "Marcus Kane and his crew, ring any bells?" Sarah's hands stilled on the bridle she was mending. Kane had been before her time, but she'd heard the stories. Bank robberies across 3 states, known for excessive violence, and no survivors. "Thought he had life without parole," she said quietly. "Did, till he got the drop on 2 guards. Sarah—" Tom hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Kane's had time to plan this. Prison reports say he spent months studying maps of the area. This region's perfect for them. Remote ranches, limited law enforcement, plenty of places to hide. You're thinking they'll come here. I'm thinking you need to leave." Tom's weathered face showed genuine concern. "Most folks are heading to town. The Coopers offered to take your stock until this blows over." Sarah tested the repaired bridle's strength. "Can't do that, Tom. You know why." He did. The Mason Ranch wasn't just property. It was her anchor, the place she'd chosen over the wandering life of a competition shooter, the place that had helped her find peace after her father's death. "Then at least let me leave a deputy." "And paint a target on my ranch?" She shook her head. "Best defense is looking like I'm not worth their trouble." Tom recognized the set of her jaw, the quiet determination that had always marked her decisions. "They're killers, Sarah. All of them. Kane's got 5 men with military background trained in combat. This isn't like the competitions." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The competitions were never what I was really trained for." After Tom left, Sarah began implementing the plans she'd developed over years of living alone. The ranch's isolation, usually a source of peace, had always carried potential dangers. Her father had taught her to see every feature as both vulnerability and advantage. She started with the obvious approaches. Tripwires hidden in the tall grass would signal anyone trying to sneak in on foot. Subtle marks on fence posts would help her gauge distances in the dark. The cattle in the north pasture were moved closer, their presence making it harder for anyone to approach unseen. Inside the house, she transformed familiar rooms into tactical positions. The heavy oak table could become cover. Windows were rigged for quick blackout. Every room had at least 2 exits, and every exit had a weapon cache nearby. As she worked, memories of her father's training surfaced. Hours spent practicing draws until her arms ached. Days in the hills, learning to read terrain, to predict where threats would come from. The endless drills that had made her the fastest gun in 3 states. "Being fast isn't enough," his voice echoed in her mind. "You need to be smart, need to control the ground, make them fight where and how you choose." By late afternoon, storm clouds were building over the mountains, matching the darkness gathering in Sarah's thoughts. The radio reported no sign of Kane's crew, but she knew what that meant. They were being careful, staying off main roads, probably moving only at night. A distant rumble of thunder made Thunder snort nervously in his stall. Sarah soothed him with practiced hands, using the moment to scan the horizon again. The coming storm would work in her favor, making it harder for anyone to approach unseen through the rain-soaked grass. She thought about Tom's warning, about Kane's military-trained crew. They'd have tactics, coordination, modern weapons probably, stolen from the prison guards. Against 6 trained killers, even her speed might not be enough, but they'd be expecting a simple ranch woman, someone to intimidate and control while they waited out the manhunt. They'd see the isolated location as a weakness, never suspecting it was a carefully maintained illusion. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as Sarah made her final preparations. Each of her cached weapons was checked one last time. Spare ammunition was distributed to strategic points. The ranch's solar-powered lights were adjusted to leave specific areas in shadow, creating visible paths that led to prepared killing zones. Thunder crashed closer now, and Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. Let them come in the storm, thinking darkness was their ally. She knew every inch of this land, could navigate it blindfolded, had spent years turning it into a fortress they wouldn't recognize until it was too late. The rain intensified, drumming on the tin roof of the barn. Somewhere out there, Kane and his crew were moving through the gathering dark, drawn to the faint lights of what they thought was an easy target. They'd learn differently soon enough. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching the storm wash her world in shades of grey. Steam rose from the coffee cup in her hands, her father's old cup, worn smooth by years of use. These quiet moments, before action, had always been the hardest part. The house creaked in the wind, familiar sounds that had become part of her life here. 10 years of sunrises and storms, of solitude broken only by occasional visitors. She'd chosen this life carefully, walked away from competitions and acclaim to find something quieter. But she'd never walked away from what she was. Her phone buzzed, a text from Bill Cooper's wife. "Last chance to come to town, please, Sarah." She left it unanswered. The valley's other ranchers were good people, but they'd never understand. This land wasn't just property, it was her heritage, her responsibility. The Mason name meant something in these parts, even if most had forgotten why. Thunder rumbled again, closer now. Sarah moved through the house with practiced efficiency, checking her preparations one final time. Her father's gun belt, oiled and ready, waited by the back door. 2 more holsters were positioned strategically, one in the kitchen, another near the front window. Each weapon was loaded with custom rounds she'd hand-tooled in the workshop, just as her father had taught her. "A gunfighter's best friend is preparation," he used to say. "The second best is patience." The radio crackled with another update. Police had found an abandoned vehicle 30 miles east, signs of Kane's crew moving on foot. Smart. Vehicles were too visible, too easily tracked. They'd be looking for new transportation, somewhere isolated to rest and regroup. Sarah checked her watch. Almost sunset. The storm would give them cover to move, and her ranch was the perfect target, remote enough for safety, with vehicles and supplies they'd need. From their perspective, it would look like a gift. She thought about Kane's crew, about the kind of men who'd follow someone like that. Prison records Tom had shared showed their backgrounds. 2 ex-military, 1 former. Contractor, all with histories of violence. They'd be confident, well-trained, used to overwhelming their targets with force and fear. But Sarah had learned from a different school. Her father's teachings weren't about force. They were about precision, about turning an opponent's confidence into vulnerability, about being underestimated. A flicker of movement caught her eye, birds rising suddenly from the south pasture. Someone was moving down there, staying low in the grass. Smart, but not smart enough. They'd have to cross open ground to reach the house. Sarah calmly poured another cup of coffee. Let them watch. Let them plan. Every approach they might consider had been prepared for, every apparent vulnerability designed to lead them exactly where she wanted them. The wind shifted, bringing the first hint of rain. Sarah thought about the life she'd built here, about the peace she'd found in simple work, and solitude. After tomorrow, that might change. Even if everything went perfectly, questions would be asked. Her carefully maintained anonymity would be compromised, but there was no choice. The Mason Ranch had stood for 4 generations, a beacon of stability in changing times. She'd die before she let it become a hideout for killers. Movement again, this time near the old oak tree. They were positioning themselves, probably planning to wait for full dark. Professional patience. She approved, even as she noted their locations. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. They'd wait, watching the house for signs of its occupant. They'd see a single woman going about her evening routine, maybe notice she was fit but not seemingly dangerous. Their confidence would grow with each passing hour. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be too late. The storm broke in earnest now, rain hammering the tin roof and washing away any traces of the intruder's movements. Sarah lit the lamps, creating illuminated windows. Clear targets that would draw attention away from the shadows where she'd actually be. Time slowed, as it always did before action. Sarah felt the familiar calm settling over her, the clarity that came with absolute focus. She thought about Tom's warning about Kane's crew being killers, about their combat training. But she'd been trained by a legend, by a man who'd learned his craft in the last days of the real West. Modern tactical training was one thing. The skills passed down through generations of gunfighters were something else entirely. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and for just a moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of dark figures moving into position. They were good, patient, coordinated, professional, but this was Masonland, and Sarah was her father's daughter. Let them come. The knock came just after midnight, polite but firm. Sarah had been expecting it, had watched 2 figures approach through the rain, while the others stayed hidden in the darkness. Smart. Send the ones who looked least threatening to test the waters. She took a moment to check her appearance in the hall mirror. Weather-worn jeans, flannel shirt, reading glasses. Just another middle-aged rancher. Nothing to fear. The Colt under her shirt sat perfectly concealed. "Who is it?" she called, letting a tremor of uncertainty enter her voice. "Sorry to disturb you, ma'am." The voice was smooth, educated. "Our car broke down a few miles back. Could we use your phone?" Sarah opened the door partway, keeping the chain on. 2 men stood on her porch, both wearing rain-soaked work clothes that didn't quite fit. The shorter one had kind eyes and an easy smile. The taller kept his hands visible, non-threatening. Both were lying with every breath. "Cell service is down," she said, matching their careful politeness. "Storm usually does it. Landline's been out since this morning." "That's a shame." The shorter man's smile stayed fixed. "Maybe we could come in, wait out the worst of it? We saw your lights from the road, hoped someone might be able to help." Sarah pretended to hesitate, let them see her weighing fear against hospitality. "I don't usually, but in this weather..." She unlatched the chain. "You boys must be freezing. Come in, I'll make coffee." They entered carefully, taking in everything while pretending not to. Sarah noticed their practiced movements, the way they positioned themselves to control the space. The taller one had military bearing. The shorter moved like law enforcement, probably where he'd learned to lie so smoothly. "I'm Jeff," the shorter one said. "This is Mike. We really appreciate this." Sarah busied herself with the coffee maker, keeping her movements deliberate, slightly nervous. "Sarah Mason. Been running this ranch since my husband passed." The lie was calculated. Let them think she was a widow, vulnerable and alone. "Nice place," Mike said, studying the room's exits. "Must be hard managing it yourself." "Getting by." Sarah measured coffee with shaking hands. In her peripheral vision, she caught their quick exchange of glances. They were buying it. Thunder crashed outside, and Sarah used the moment to stumble slightly, letting them see weakness. Jeff stepped forward automatically to steady her, his hand brushing near her concealed weapon without recognizing what it was. "Careful there, ma'am." His smile remained perfect, but his eyes had changed. They'd made their decision. Sarah saw the moment coming before they moved, Jeff's hand sliding toward his waistband, Mike shifting to block the kitchen door. They do it clean, professional. No witnesses, no traces. "You boys aren't really stranded, are you?" she asked quietly. The change was instant. Jeff's kind smile vanished, replaced by cold efficiency. Mike's hand emerged with a suppressed pistol. "Prison guard issue," she noted absently. "No, ma'am," Jeff said. and I'm afraid you've got a choice to make. This can go easy or hard." Sarah kept her hands visible, maintained her nervous posture. "There's money in the safe, not much, but it's yours. It's not about money." Mike's voice was clipped, professional. "We need this place for a few days. You're going to help us keep things quiet. Cooperate. You might survive this." Sarah let them see her fear, let them think they had control. Through the window she caught glimpses of the others approaching through the rain, all according to plan. "Please," she whispered, "I won't cause trouble." Jeff's smile returned, confident now. "Smart lady. Just do what you're told." And the coffee pot beeped and Sarah fumbled the pot deliberately, sending hot coffee splashing. Both men instinctively looked down. In that split second, her practiced eyes caught every detail she needed. Their positions, their weapons, the overconfidence that would make them slow. Soon, she thought, but not yet. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, reaching for a towel. "So clumsy when I'm nervous." "It's fine," Jeff soothed, fully committed to his role now. "Why don't you show us around the place? We need to know the layout." Sarah nodded meekly, letting them think they had won. Let them bring the others in. Let them get comfortable. Night was still young, and she could be very, very patient. The rest of Kane's crew filtered in from the rain, each man carrying himself with the same military precision. Sarah counted them as she shuffled nervously through her house tour. 6 total, all armed, all dangerous. Kane himself stood back, watching her with predator's eyes, while his men secured the property. "Phones are dead," one reported. "No signals getting in or out." "Nearest neighbor?" Kane asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. 5 miles east," Sarah answered, ringing. Her hands, the Coopers. "They check on me sometimes, but not in weather like this." Kane nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. Thompson, check the outbuildings. Rodriguez, get a perimeter set up. The rest of you, make yourselves comfortable. We'll be here a while." Sarah watched them deploy with practiced efficiency. They were good, she had to give them that. Their weapons stayed concealed but ready. They moved in coordinated patterns, covering approaches, securing exits. Everything by the book. "Mrs. Mason," Kane said, smoothly, "why don't you make us something to eat? Must have supplies for unexpected guests." It wasn't a request. Sarah ducked her head submissively. "Of course, the pantry's this way." She led him to the kitchen, noting how his men positioned themselves throughout the house, just where she wanted them. The storm's intensity had forced them all inside, exactly as she'd planned when she'd left the barn doors conspicuously open to the rain. "Quite a setup you have here," Kane observed, as she gathered cooking supplies. "Remote location, good sight lines, multiple exits. Almost like it was designed for something." Sarah kept her movements small, frightened. "My husband, he was paranoid about security, military veteran." "Smart man." Kane's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And now it's just you, all alone out here?" "Managing the best I can." She dropped a pan deliberately, flinching at the noise. Let them see weakness, let them grow confident. Through the kitchen window, she watched Thompson and Rodriguez checking the outbuildings. They'd find her carefully staged scenes, the workshop with its half-maintained equipment, the barn with its ordinary tools and tack. Nothing to make them suspicious. What they wouldn't find were her hidden caches, the weapons and ammunition concealed behind false walls, the escape routes masked by years of careful preparation, the kill zones she'd created by arranging innocent-looking farm equipment. "Hope you boys like beef stew," she said, her voice trembling appropriately. "It's all I have ready." "That'll do fine," Kane replied. He turned to Jeff. "Keep an eye on our host. I'm going to check the upper floor." Sarah heard his careful footsteps above, methodically checking each room. He'd find exactly what she meant him to find. A widow's bedroom, old photos, nothing threatening. The hidden panel in the closet would go unnoticed. She'd spent years perfecting its concealment. The storm intensified, rain drumming on the roof like gunfire. Perfect cover for what was to come. The weather would mask movement, muffle sounds, and these men, despite their training, were already relaxing. The apparently harmless woman and secure location making them less vigilant with each passing minute. "Ma'am?" Jeff's voice carried false concern. "You're shaking." Why don't you sit down? We'll help with dinner." Sarah allowed him to lead her to a chair, noting how the others had spread throughout the house. 2 in the living room, 1 watching. The front approach, Kane upstairs, and 2 still checking the outbuildings, separated, manageable. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're very kind." Jeff smiled his practiced smile. "Just cooperate, and this will all be over soon." Sarah dropped, her eyes submissively hiding her own smile. Yes, it would be over soon, but not the way they imagined. The stew simmered on the stove, filling the house with comforting aromas. Outside, the storm reached its peak, nature providing the perfect backdrop for what was to come. Each man had found his position, feeling secure in their control of the situation. They didn't realize they were exactly where she wanted them, didn't notice how each seemingly random piece of furniture, each innocent item, had been placed with purpose, didn't understand that every step they'd taken since arriving had been choreographed by a master of her craft. The trap was set. Now came the hard part, waiting for the perfect moment to spring it. The first sign that something was wrong came when Rodriguez didn't return from his final perimeter check. Kane noticed it first, his practiced instinct sensing the delay. "Thompson, check on Rodriguez." Sarah kept stirring the stew, her movements deliberately slow and anxious. She'd positioned the pot perfectly, its steam fogging the kitchen window, obscuring the view of Thompson's approach to the barn. "Probably just being thorough," Jeff offered, but his hand drifted closer to his concealed weapon. Sarah watched the subtle shift in their confidence. Trained men could sense when situations changed, when carefully laid plans began to fray. They didn't know what was wrong yet, but they felt it. The storm chose that moment to knock out the hour. Darkness flooded the house, broken only by lightning flashes and the gas stove's blue flame. Sarah fumbled with the flashlight, letting it slip from seemingly nervous fingers. The beam spun across the floor, briefly illuminating the living room, where 2 of Kane's men instantly moved to defensive positions. "Got some lanterns in the pantry," she offered, her voice shaking. "Storm kills the power up here all the time." Kane nodded to Jeff. "Go with her." In the pantry's confined space, Sarah made a show of reaching for lanterns on a high shelf. Jeff moved to help, exactly as she'd anticipated. His attention focused upward. He never noticed how her foot slid. Precisely into position, the next power surge brought a crash from the barn. Everyone tensed. "What was that?" Kane demanded. "Wind catches the doors sometimes," Sarah explained, noting how Jeff's attention split between her and the noise. "Perfect." "Thompson, report." Kane spoke into a handheld radio. Static answered. Sarah chose that moment to stumble backwards, apparently startled by the thunder. Her elbow caught Jeff's solar plexus with surgical precision, driving the air from his lungs. As he doubled over, her other hand found the pressure point in his neck. He dropped silently, unconscious before he hit the floor. 10 seconds. Her father's voice whispered in her memory. "Any longer and you lose the advantage of surprise." Sarah eased Jeff's body into a corner, retrieving his weapon with practiced efficiency. The pantry's entrance gave her a clear view of Kane dispatching another man to check the barn. 3 down, or soon would be. 3 to go. She took a moment to center herself, feeling the familiar calm of combat settling over her. The house was dark, but that didn't matter. She'd practiced. This blind knew every creaking board and shadowed corner. "Mrs. Mason," Kane's voice carried a new edge. "Everything all right in there?" "Just looking for matches," she called back, injecting a tremor into her voice. Let them think Jeff was still with her, still in control. Lightning illuminated the kitchen, showing Kane's growing unease. His remaining men had shifted positions, instinctively drawing closer together. Their professional calm was cracking, replaced by the wariness of experienced soldiers who sense an ambush. The barn door slammed in the wind. Kane grabbed his radio. Again. "Thompson, Rodriguez, report immediately." Sarah used the radio static to mask her movement, sliding Jeff's compact pistol into her waistband while palming her own Colt. The weight felt familiar, comforting. Like greeting an old friend, a flash of lightning revealed the man Kane had sent to the barn, approaching through the rain. His posture screamed tension, weapon now openly drawn. He'd found something out there, something that shattered their assumptions about their supposedly helpless hostage. "Kane!" he shouted over the storm. "We've got a prob!" The lights surged back on, momentarily blinding everyone. Sarah moved before their vision could adjust, decades of training taking over. The Colt seemed to materialize in her hand, its report lost in a perfectly timed thunderclap. The returning man's gun hand erupted in red, his weapon clattering to the porch. He stared in shock at his bleeding fingers, then at the kitchen window where Sarah had fired through a gap in the steam-fogged glass, no wider than a playing card. Kane and his remaining men dove for cover, their shouts mixing with the storm. Professional calm shattered, replaced by the chaos of men who suddenly realize they're the ones being hunted. "Jeff!" Kane shouted. "Get out here now!" Sarah stepped from the pantry, letting them see her empty hands. "Jeff's taking a nap." Her voice had changed, the trembling replaced by steel. "Thompson and Rodriguez too. Don't worry, they're alive. For now." Lightning flashed again, illuminating her stance. Gone was the nervous widow, replaced by something else entirely, something that made trained killers instinctively tighten their grips on their weapons. "Who are you?" Kane demanded, his own weapon-trained center mass on her chest. Sarah smiled, and there was nothing harmless about it. "Just a rancher." She nodded toward his gun. "Nice weapon. Prison guard issue, right? Better hope you maintained it properly. Be a shame if all this rain caused a misfire." Kane's eyes narrowed, recognizing the shift in power. "You're not just a rancher." "No," Sarah agreed. "I'm a mason." She let that sink in, saw the recognition dawn in his eyes. "Now, you boys have a choice to make, and I suggest you make it carefully." The storm raged outside, but in the kitchen, time seemed to freeze. 3 armed killers faced a single woman, each side knowing the next move would determine everything. Sarah's finger rested lightly on her Colt's trigger, remembering her father's words. Let them make the first mistake. She wouldn't have to wait long. Kane made his first mistake. His eyes flicked left, a silent signal to his remaining men. Sarah read the intent in that fraction of a second, was moving before they could execute their plan. Her first shot took out the overhead light, plunging the kitchen into darkness broken only by lightning. She was rolling as their return fire shattered the space where she'd stood, their trained response exactly what she'd expected. Predictable, professional, fatal. The Colt sang twice more in her hands. One round caught the man near the living room door in his weapon hand, a mirror of his companion outside. The second shot split the stock of Kane's rifle, sending splinters into his cheek. Disabling shots, precise despite the darkness. She wasn't ready to kill. Not yet. "That's 2 more hands I didn't have to shoot," Sarah called from behind the kitchen island. "Want to try for a third?" Kane's laugh held no humor. "Mason. Should have known. Old Tom Mason's girl. The one they called names don't matter." She cut him off. "What matters is choice. You've got 3 men bleeding but alive, 3 more napping. Walk out now. You will get to keep breathing." Lightning illuminated the kitchen in frozen snapshots. Kane and his last man had shifted positions, using her furniture for cover. Good tactics, but she'd arranged this room for exactly this scenario. Every piece of cover had a vulnerability she'd memorized. "Can't do that," Kane replied. "You know what's waiting if we get caught. And you know what's waiting if you stay." Sarah kept her voice calm, professional. 20 years ago, I won the 4-state speed championship with a time of 0.43 seconds. Want to guess if I've gotten slower or faster since then? The last man, forgotten until now, made Kane's second mistake. He tried to flank her position, moving through the shadows near the hallway. Sarah had positioned a mirror there years ago, its reflection invisible in the darkness, but perfect for catching movement. Her shot caught the edge of his boot heel, spinning him off balance. His return fire went wide, shredding the cabinets above her head. Before he could recover, her second round found his shoulder. Not fatal, but he wouldn't be holding a gun anytime soon. 0.41 seconds, she announced to the sudden silence. "Getting faster in my old age." Kane's voice held new respect. 6 shots. That's a revolver you're using. You're empty." Sarah smiled in the darkness. "Sure about that? Willing to bet your life?" Thunder crashed outside, and Sarah used the noise to cover her movement. Years of practice in this room let her slide to a new position without a sound. In the next lightning flash, Kane would find himself looking at her old cover. "Doesn't have to end this way," Kane tried. "We've got resources, connections, could make it worth your while." "Already ended," Sarah replied. "Moment you stepped onto Mason land carrying prison guard weapons. Moment you threatened what's mine." Kane's response was to open fire at her. Previous position, the muzzle flashes betraying his location exactly as she'd planned. Sarah's return shot split the air by his ear, close enough to feel the wind of its passage. "7," she said quietly. "Want to keep counting." The storm's intensity peaked, rain hammering the roof like a drum roll. Sarah knew what came next. Kane was a professional, which meant he'd take the one option left to him. Both men fired simultaneously at her position, a sustained barrage meant to pin her down. Under the cover of their fire and the storm, Kane broke for the door, keeping low, moving fast. Sarah let him get halfway. Her next shot didn't miss. Kane's knee exploded, dropping him to the floor with a cry of pain and surprise. Before he could roll, she was on him, his own weapon turned smoothly aside, her knee pinning his gun hand. "8," she said, the Colt's barrel cold against his temple. "Still think I'm counting?" The last echoes of gunfire faded, leaving only the sound of rain and thunder. From various positions around the room and outside, the moans of injured men created a pained chorus. "You could have killed us all," Kane said, realization dawning. Every shot was deliberate. "Still could." Sarah's voice held no emotion. "Got 6 more brothers like you out there? That's what it would take to empty this gun." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the kitchen. Brass casings gleamed on the floor like fallen stars. Gunsmoke hung in the air, mingling with the scent of cordite and the forgotten stew. "The Mason name," Kane said quietly. "It wasn't just your father they talked about, was it?" "No." Sarah eased back slightly, keeping him covered. "He taught me everything he knew. Then I got better." She saw the final flicker of fight leave his eyes, replaced by understanding. They'd come to her ranch looking for an easy target, a simple widow, living alone. Instead, they'd found something from the old days, something that still lived in these hills, passed down through generations of people who understood that some skills never went out of style. "Make your choice," she told him, "but make it fast. Storm's dying down, and I've got some calls to make." Outside, the thunder rumbled one last time, like heaven's own applause. Sarah worked with mechanical efficiency in the storm's aftermath. Years of training took over as she secured weapons, bound wounds, and zip-tied prisoners. Each man was carefully positioned in the living room, their injuries treated, but their mobility severely limited. The storm had faded to a gentle rain, its timing almost too perfect. Like nature itself, had conspired to help her defend what was hers. "You're making a mistake," Kane said, watching her work. His knee was bandaged but throbbing. "People will come looking for us. Professional people." Sarah checked her phone as power returned to the valley. "You mean the other 3 men? From Sterling Prison? The ones waiting with the backup vehicle?" She smiled at Kane's carefully controlled reaction. "Called in some friends. They're being handled." Thunder rumbled in the distance as she dialed the sheriff's number. Tom Riley answered on the first ring. "Sarah, you okay?" "Got some garbage." "That needs collecting," she replied calmly. 9 men. Most need medical attention." A long pause. "How bad?" "Nothing fatal. Mostly hand and shoulder wounds. 1 knee." She glanced at Kane. "They'll live to stand trial." 9! Tom's voice sharpened. "Reports only showed 6 escapees." "Might want to look into some of your prison guards," Sarah suggested. 3 of these boys are wearing corrections department gear, not standard issue either, special ops quality. Kane's eyes narrowed at this, recognizing how much she'd picked up during the brief confrontation. Professional assessment from a professional. Sarah heard Tom barking orders in the background. "State police are already rolling," he said. "FBI too. This just became something bigger. Usually does." Sarah kept her voice neutral. "How long?" 20 minutes minimum. Storm took down some trees on the main road." A pause. "You sure you're okay alone with them?" Sarah surveyed her captives. Jeff and the others she'd subdued earlier were awake now, secured and sitting quietly. They'd seen enough to know better than to cause trouble. "They're not going anywhere," she assured Tom. "Just get here when you can." After hanging up, she began making coffee. The adrenaline was fading, and it would be a long night of questions and reports. Kane watched her domestic movements with a mixture of respect and calculation. "You knew we were coming," he said finally. "Had time to prepare." Sarah poured a cup, not bothering to deny it. "Wasn't hard to figure. Remote location, good site. Lines, access to the northern roads. Perfect place for fugitives to hole up." "That's not what I mean." Kane's voice dropped lower. "This whole setup, the ranch, the Lonely Widow Act, it's a trap, isn't it? Has been for years." One of his men shifted uncomfortably. "Boss!" "Shut up!" Kane snapped. "Look around. Every piece of furniture positioned for cover. Clear lines. Of fire, hidden weapons caches I bet we didn't even find half of. She's been running a honey trap for years, just waiting for someone like us." Sarah sipped her coffee. "Interesting theory." "How many others?" Kane pressed. "How many crews thought they found an easy target and ended up in custody, or the ground?" "Wouldn't know," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm just a rancher. Ask around, though. Plenty of stories in these hills about what happens to people who prey on the wrong targets." Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the room one last time. In that brief flash, Kane saw something that made him go very still. A shadow box on the wall, partially hidden by a curtain. Inside, a collection of badges: FBI, Marshal's Service, State Police. "Trophies?" he asked quietly. "Gifts," Sarah corrected, "from grateful people. Like I said, ask around, plenty of stories." One of the other men suddenly straightened. "Mason, Sarah Mason. There was a case, maybe 15 years back. A crew hitting isolated ranches across 3 states. They disappeared up here somewhere. Lots of empty country out there," Sarah noted. "Easy to disappear if you don't know the land." She smiled slightly. "Or if you run into someone who does." Kane's expression showed growing understanding. "We're not the first to underestimate. You, not even close, won't be the last." Sarah heard the first distant sirens, but that's a problem for another day. She did one final check of their restraints, her movements precise and practiced. These men had come to her land thinking they'd found shelter, a perfect hideout with a helpless victim. Instead, they'd walked into a legacy older than any of them, a reminder that some skills, some traditions, never truly died out. The sirens grew closer. Sarah knew what came next. Questions, investigations, renewed attention she'd spent years avoiding. Her quiet life would change after tonight, but that didn't matter. What mattered was defending what was hers, protecting her land, her home, her father's legacy, and sending a message that would echo through certain circles. The Mason name still meant something in these hills, and Sarah Mason was her father's daughter. The law arrived in waves. First Sheriff Riley and his deputies, then state police, finally FBI in their dark SUVs with their tablets and radios. Sarah's quiet ranch became a flood of flashlights, evidence markers, and urgent conversations. She sat on her porch, watching them work. Tom Riley joined her, offering a fresh cup of coffee. "Just got off the phone with the FBI special agent in charge," he said quietly. "Kane's escape wasn't random. Someone helped them get out, someone with resources." "Figured that," Sarah replied. "Their gear was too good, training too professional." Tom nodded toward the FBI agents interviewing the prisoners. 3 of them were supposed to be in maximum security at Sterling. Instead, they're working as prison guards, complete with documentation that would pass any background check. Inside, Kane was talking to the federal agents. His posture had changed, become more confident despite his injuries, like a man who knew he still held cards to play. "He's not worried," Sarah observed. "Man facing multiple life sentences should be worried. That's not all." Tom's voice dropped lower. "Just before the escape, Sterling Prison received 6 new inmates, high-security transfers. Except when we checked, the originating prisons had no record of the transfers." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Replacements. They switched them out. Perfect copies, fingerprints, DNA, everything matched the system. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make Kane and his crew disappear officially. A federal agent approached, mid-40s, wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour. "Ms. Mason, I'm Special Agent Phillips. We need to talk about what happened here." Sarah noted his carefully neutral tone, the way he positioned himself, to observe both her and the scene. This wasn't a routine interview. "Already gave my statement to the state police," she said. "Yes." Phillips consulted his tablet. "Former competition shooter, retired from the circuit 20 years ago, inherited the ranch from your father. Live alone, no close family." He looked up. "That's the official story, isn't it?" "Something. On your mind, Agent Phillips? Kane's crew had help escaping, professional help. They were supposed to disappear completely. New identities already in place. Instead, they ended up here." His eyes met hers. "Seems like quite a coincidence." Sarah sipped her coffee. "Like I told Kane, remote location, good sightlines. Natural place for fugitives to hide. Natural place for a trap, too." Phillips studied her carefully. "We found weapons caches throughout your property. Strategic positions pre-sighted and prepared, almost like you were expecting trouble." "Live alone out here," Sarah replied calmly. "Have to be prepared." "For what exactly?" Before she could answer, commotion erupted near the FBI vehicles. One of the agents was arguing into his phone, his face showing growing concern. Phillips excused himself quickly. Sarah watched him join the conversation, saw the moment bad news hit. His posture stiffened, hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. Tom leaned closer. "What's going on?" "Wait for it," Sarah murmured. Phillips returned, his practiced neutrality replaced by urgent focus. "The prisoners being transported to Federal Holding. They never arrived. Transport was hit 10 minutes ago. Professional job. Everyone's gone." Sarah nodded as if she'd expected this. "Kane's backup plan. The real professionals coming to clean up loose ends." "You knew?" Phillips demanded. "Knew someone would come. Men like Kane, they always have insurance." She stood, stretching tired muscles. "You should get your people under cover. Sightlines aren't good from where they're parked." As if to emphasize her point, a red dot appeared on Phillips' chest, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire law enforcement contingent was painted with sniper lasers. "Nobody move!" a voice boomed from the darkness. "Weapons down, hands where we can see them." Sarah counted the laser sights. At least 6 shooters, positioned exactly where she'd expect professionals to set up. They'd studied the terrain, picked their spots perfectly, almost perfectly. "You're in my house," she called into the darkness, her voice carrying clear authority. "On my land. Last warning. Walk away." Laughter answered her. "Lady, you don't seem to understand the situation. We've got every officer here painted. One wrong move, this turns into a bloodbath." Sarah smiled slightly. "Count your lasers again, carefully." A pause, then cursing from the darkness. Red dots began disappearing one by one, replaced by the distinctive sound of bodies hitting the ground. "Didn't just prepare for frontside approaches," Sarah explained to a stunned Phillips. "Had 20 years to set this place up. Every perfect. Sniper position out there is covered by counter-sniper positions you can't see." More sounds from the darkness, zip ties being tightened, weapons being secured. Local voices Sarah recognized, longtime neighbors who knew every fold of this land. "Welcome to Montana," Tom said dryly, "where even the backup plans have backup plans." Philip stared at Sarah with new understanding. This really was a trap, not just for Kane's crew, but for whoever was backing them. "Like I said," Sarah turned to head inside. "Been doing this a while. Now, might want to get some people up into those ridges. Second wave should be here soon." "Second wave?" "Oh, yes." Sarah checked her Colt with practiced efficiency.
"Night's
Sarah
just getting
moved
started."
through the darkness like a ghost, her boots making no sound on the rain-soaked ground. 20 yards behind her, Agent Phillips struggled to match her silence, his city-trained steps seemingly thunderous in comparison. "They'll have night vision," he whispered. "Thermal imaging." "Good equipment," Sarah agreed softly. "Won't help them." They'd left the law enforcement contingent at the ranch house, protecting Kane and his crew. Only Phillips had insisted on joining her, his FBI training warring with his growing realization that he was out of his depth. A owl called from somewhere ahead. 3 short hoots. Sarah stopped, raised her hand in acknowledgement. Bill Cooper's signal, right on schedule. "How many neighbors did you call?" Phillips asked. "Didn't call anyone." Sarah checked her Colt's cylinder out of habit. "But word gets around. People up here look after their own." The ridge ahead offered perfect views of the valley approaches. Any professional team would want to hold that ground. Sarah had spent years making them think. "Exactly that. Tripwire," she murmured, pointing to a nearly invisible line. "They'll be watching it, waiting for someone to trigger it." Phillips squinted in the darkness. "How do we get past?" "We don't." Sarah smiled slightly. "We're the bait." As if on cue, shadows moved on the ridge, professional operators taking positions, their movements betraying military training. Sarah counted 6, each one exactly where she'd expected them to be. "FBI, identify yourselves." Phillips raised his weapon. Following procedure even now. The ridge erupted in gunfire. Phillips dove for cover, but Sarah remained standing. The bullets sparked off rocks and trees around them, none coming closer than a foot to their positions. "Warning shots," she noted calmly. "They're good, very good." "That's what you're taking from this?" Phillips hissed from behind a boulder. Sarah raised her voice. "Nice shooting, real professional. Now check your flanks." Confusion rippled through the shadows on the ridge. Then the night came alive with sound. Rifles cycling, boots scuffing rock, the distinctive clicks of zip ties being tightened. "Local hunters," Sarah explained to a stunned Phillips. "Been watching those positions since sunset, just waiting for someone to be dumb enough to use them." More shadows emerged from the darkness. Weathered men and women in hunting gear, each one moving with the quiet confidence of those who knew this land intimately. They'd taken the professional team completely by surprise, approaching through routes no tactical assessment would consider possible. "6 more for the collection," Bill Cooper announced, approaching with his rifle casually shouldered. "Makes 11 total, counting the ones from the first wave." Sarah nodded. "They'll have a backup element. Probably watching right now, learning from their team's mistakes." "Let them watch." Bill's grin was fierce in the darkness. "Been a while since we had a proper hunt." Phillips stood slowly, holstering his weapon. "This isn't your first time dealing with something like this." "Things happen in remote places," Sarah replied. "People disappear. Sometimes they're never found." She checked her phone. "Tom's got the prisoners secure?" "Sheriff Riley called in some favors," Bill confirmed. "State police SWAT teams holding the ranch house. Nobody's getting to Kane or his crew." Sarah studied the ridge where the professional team had been captured. Perfect position by tactical standards. Good fields of fire, multiple escape routes, excellent sight lines. Also perfectly predictable to anyone who knew this country. "They're learning," she mused. "Next wave won't make the same mistakes. They'll avoid the obvious positions, try something we won't expect." "How many waves should we expect?" Phillips asked. "Depends how much Kane knows, how valuable he is to whoever arranged this." Sarah started walking, her steps silent again. "But they're running out of options and time." Dawn was approaching, the sky lightening imperceptibly in the east. Soon, the advantage of darkness would fade, making it harder for professional operators to move unseen. "They'll try something bold," Sarah continued, "something to change the game before they lose their cover of darkness." As if summoned by her, words, an explosion lit up the night. The ranch house's windows flared orange, accompanied by the distinctive crackle of automatic weapons fire. "State police SWAT team's good," Bill observed, "but they're fighting on our ground now." Sarah checked her Colt one final time. "Time to end this. Agent Phillips, stay with Bill. His people know how to keep you alive." "Where are you going?" "To explain some things to our visitors." Her smile was cold in the pre-dawn light. "About respect, about consequences, about why some places aren't worth the trouble of taking." She melted into the darkness before Phillips could respond, moving with the absolute confidence of someone who knew every fold of the land, every shadow and game trail. The professionals hunting her crew would be good, expertly trained, well-equipped, deadly, but they were hunting on Mason land, and they were about to learn why that was always a fatal mistake. The ranch house had become a war zone. Smoke poured from broken windows as the state police SWAT team exchanged fire with the professional strike force. In the pre-dawn darkness, muzzle flashes strobed like lightning, turning the familiar building into something from a nightmare. Sarah approached from the south, using routes she'd prepared for exactly this scenario. The attackers had breached the perimeter with surgical precision, their coordination showing years of high-level tactical training. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd let themselves be herded. "Status?" she whispered into her radio. "SWAT teams holding the inner rooms," Tom Riley reported. "Kane and his crew are secure, but these boys aren't playing around. Military-grade weapons, flashbangs, shaped charges." "Casualties?" "2 officers wounded, nothing serious. They're trying to pin us down, not kill us. Need us occupied while they extract their target." Sarah smiled grimly. Everything proceeding exactly as she'd predicted. "How many?" "At least 12, maybe more in reserve." Through her rifle scope, Sarah counted the attacking force, 14 operators, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of years working together. Their black tactical gear bore no identifying marks, but their equipment was top-tier military spec. "They're not here to kill," she observed. "They need Kane alive, need to know what he might have told us." A new explosion rocked the house, this one precisely placed to breach the eastern wall. The attackers had studied the building's layout, knew exactly where to hit it, but Sarah had spent years preparing for this kind of assault. The breach revealed only another layer of reinforced walls, turning their careful planning into wasted effort. Getting frustrated, she noted, as another explosion failed to create the entrance they wanted. About to do something desperate. Right on cue, 6 of the operators broke from cover, charging toward the house behind a rolling barrage of covering fire. Perfect technique, flawless execution. In any normal situation, it would have worked. Sarah's first shot caught their leader. In the tactical vest, the impact spinning him backwards into his team. Her second round shattered the weapon of the rear guard, while her third eliminated their radio communications. The professional team scattered their coordinated assault, dissolving into chaos as shots seemed to come from impossible angles. Sarah was already moving, using routes she'd mapped through years of preparation. "They're pulling back," Tom reported, regrouping behind the barn. "Not pulling back," Sarah corrected, "changing tactics. They've just realized this isn't a normal operation." The attacking force had split into smaller teams, abandoning their direct assault in favor of more strategic positioning. Their commander was adapting, learning from their failures. "Bill," Sarah called quietly into her radio. "You in position?" "North Ridge is secured," Cooper replied. "Got 8 rifles up here, all with clear shots if they try flanking that direction." "They won't." Sarah studied the operators' movements. "They're professionals. They'll have studied satellite imagery, terrain maps. They know that Ridge is the obvious position. So what's their play?" Before Sarah could answer, multiple smoke grenades detonated around the house. Thick white smoke began filling the yard, providing perfect cover for movement. "There it is," Sarah murmured. "Smoke cover for their real assault team. Watch the west side." The smoke was military-grade, designed to block both visual and thermal imaging. Under its cover, the professional team would be able to approach unseen, using the confusion to insert their extraction unit. But Sarah had spent 20 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Every approach had been mapped, every countermeasure carefully planned. "Tom," she spoke into the radio, "hit the ground sprinklers." The ranch's irrigation system sputtered. To life, the water cutting swathes through the smoke screen. In the growing light of dawn, the attacking force found their cover disappearing, leaving them exposed. "Amateur hour," Sarah commented, putting another carefully placed shot through an operator's weapon. Didn't even check for sprinkler heads during their recon. The professional team's commander barked orders, trying to salvage the operation, but Sarah could hear the edge in his voice, the growing realization that they'd walked into something they didn't understand. "Last chance," she called out, her voice carrying across the battlefield. "Walk away now. You get to keep breathing. Stay and I start aiming somewhere beside your weapons and vests." For a moment, silence fell across the ranch. The operators looked to their commander, waiting for his decision. They were professionals, used to dealing with difficult situations. But this was something else, something that violated every tactical assumption they'd been trained to rely on. "Who are you?" the commander demanded. "Just a rancher," Sarah replied calmly, "protecting what's mine. Question is, what are you? Professional enough to know when you're beaten, or stupid enough to die here?" Dawn's first real light crept over. The mountains, illuminating the scene in harsh clarity. Smoke drifted in tatters, cut through by sprinkler spray. The professional team's perfect tactical position had become a trap, every angle covered by unseen rifles. The commander lowered his weapon slowly. "Stand down," he ordered his men. "Mission's compromised." Sarah watched them carefully. Wise, a choice. Now let's talk about who sent you, and why they want Kane so badly. The real game was just beginning. Dawn painted the aftermath in harsh light. 14 professional operators sat zip-tied and disarmed, their tactical gear marking them as something far above ordinary mercenaries. Sarah studied their equipment, while Agent Phillips made calls to increasingly higher levels of FBI authority. "These aren't contractor weapons," she noted, examining one of the rifles. "These are classified prototypes, military hardware that isn't supposed to exist yet." The team's commander remained silent, but Sarah caught the slight tension in his jaw. She'd hit a nerve. "Getting interesting responses from DC," Phillips reported, covering his phone. "Soon as I mentioned the weapons, everything went classified. Got 3 different agencies claiming jurisdiction." Sarah nodded toward Kane, still secured inside with the SWAT team. "Because of him, he knows something worth sending ghost teams with prototype weapons to extract him." The commander's expression flickered again. Sarah caught it, moved closer. "You're not here for Kane," she said softly. "He's not the target at all. He's the bait." This time, the commander's reaction was unmistakable. A professional tell that confirmed everything. "Tom," Sarah called to the sheriff, "check Kane's crew. Again. Carefully. One of them isn't what they seem." Kane's laugh carried from inside the house. "Figured it out, did you? Took you long enough." The SWAT team parted as Sarah entered, revealing Kane still seated calmly despite his wounds. But his posture had changed, the desperate escaped convict replaced by something else entirely. "Agent James Kane," he said smoothly. "CIA Special Activities, Division. Or I was, until I went too deep undercover." He nodded to one of his men, the quiet one who'd played the role of prison guard. "Agent Wilson here was supposed to extract me before things got complicated." Sarah's hand never strayed, far from her Colt. "And the others? Genuine escapees. Had to make it look real. Didn't expect to run into whatever this operation of yours is." Phillips entered, his phone call finished. "Just got confirmation. Kane's been deep cover for 3 years, infiltrating a shadow organization inside. The intelligence community. Organization that's apparently very interested in this region." "Because of the bunkers," Sarah said quietly. Kane's eyebrows rose. "You know about those?" "My father did. Left notes. Underground facilities from the Cold War, supposedly abandoned." She studied Kane carefully. "Except they're not abandoned, are they?" "No. Someone's been using them, moving things through them, things that don't officially exist." Kane grimaced as he shifted his wounded knee, was getting close to figuring out who. "Then my cover got blown, extraction went bad. Had to improvise." Sarah turned to the commander of the tactical team. "And you're the cleanup crew, sent to eliminate everyone who knows about the bunkers, including Kane." The commander remained silent, but his eyes showed new respect. This wasn't the simple rancher they'd expected to find. 3 years of work, Kane said bitterly, getting close to the inner circle. Then someone made us. Someone high up. He looked at the tactical team. Someone who can deploy classified units with prototype weapons. A new sound cut through the morning air. Helicopters approaching, multiple aircraft flying low and fast. "That'll be the real cleanup crew," Kane said urgently. "These boys were just the advance team. The ones coming now, they don't leave witnesses." Sarah's expression hardened. "How many?" "At least 30 operators. Extreme prejudice authorization. They'll level this place, make it look like a gang war gone bad. Phillips was already calling for backup, but Sarah knew help wouldn't arrive in time. The choppers were too close. "Tom," she called to the sheriff, "get your people into the tunnels, the old entrance behind the barn." "You knew about that?" Kane asked sharply. "My father helped build them." Sarah checked her Colt methodically. "Built other things too, things for when the government went too far." The tactical team commander spoke for the first time. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The people coming, they're ghosts. They don't exist, can't be stopped." Sarah's smile was cold. "Everyone exists. Everyone bleeds. And everyone can be stopped." She turned to Kane. "Ready to help solve your bunker mystery?" Kane studied her for a long moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This whole setup, the ranch, the defenses, you're not just protecting your land, you're guarding something." "Yes." Sarah headed for the door, "and those helicopters are about to learn why." 3 black helicopters appeared over the mountain ridge, their sleek profiles marking them as military-spec stealth aircraft. No markings, no identification. Ghosts, just like their operators. 2 minutes, Sarah announced, leading Kane and Phillips toward the barn. The captured tactical team had been secured underground, along with the local law enforcement personnel. Only Tom Riley remained above ground, coordinating the last evacuations. "What exactly are we walking into?" Phillips demanded as Sarah unlocked a hidden panel in the barn's foundation. "The reason this land has been in my family for 4 generations." Sarah revealed a reinforced steel door, its surface disguised to match the surrounding concrete. "The reason we've been protecting it." The door opened to a steep stairwell, descending into darkness. Kane studied the construction with professional interest. "This isn't Cold War era," he noted. "This is modern, recently maintained. My father's work, and his father's before him." Sarah activated chemical light sticks, tossing them down the stairs. "The government built the bunkers, then abandoned them, or thought they did." The helicopters were closer now, their distinctive sound dampened by advanced technology. Professional pilots flying a precision approach. "But someone kept using them," Kane said, "moving things through them, things that don't officially exist." "Yes," Sarah's voice hardened. "Weapons, experimental technology, things that violated every law and treaty, using old tunnels to hide their operations." Phillips checked his weapon nervously. "And your family knew?" "Didn't just know. Documented everything, gathered evidence, compiled records, waited for the right moment." She smiled grimly. "Moment's finally here." The stairwell led to a long corridor, its walls lined with modern surveillance equipment disguised to look abandoned. Ahead, voices echoed, the local deputies and SWAT teams securing the captured operators. 4 generations, Kane mused. 4 generations of Masons playing rancher while actually guarding these tunnels, watching, waiting, learning their routes, their methods, the ways in between ways they use. Sarah checked a monitor showing the approaching helicopters. "Building our own network." A deeper rumble joined the helicopter sounds. Heavy transport vehicles approaching by ground. The cleanup crew was thorough, coming from all directions. "They'll breach the house first," Kane predicted. "Clear it room by room, then fan out to the outbuildings. Standard tactical sweep." "Let them." Sarah activated more systems, bringing the tunnel complex fully online. "They're looking for a ranch house. They'll find something else entirely." Phillips studied the surveillance feeds. "Those aren't just cleanup teams. Those are elite operators. Delta Force, maybe SEAL Team 6. Doesn't matter how elite they are." Sarah's voice carried absolute certainty. "This is Mason land, has been for 4 generations. Everything they think they know about this place is wrong." Kane's eyes widened as more monitors activated, showing the true scale of what lay beneath. The ranch. This isn't just a bunker complex. This is a command center. From here we can monitor every tunnel in their network, every secret route, every hidden cache. Sarah checked her weapons one final time. 4 generations of watching, recording, preparing. Today we shut them down. The helicopters were on final approach now. Through the monitors, they watched elite operators fast rope onto the ranch house roof, others establishing a perimeter with mechanical precision. "They're good," Sarah acknowledged. "Very good. But they're fighting blind, fighting on ground that's been prepared for this moment for almost 100 years. Philip stared at the monitors in growing understanding. "Your whole family all this time, protecting what's ours, protecting the truth." Sarah's smile was fierce in the artificial light. They thought the old ways were dead, thought they could operate in shadows, use these mountains for their secret games. Kane checked his borrowed weapon. Time to remind them otherwise? Time to remind them that some things don't change. Sarah activated the final systems, bringing the command center to full power. Some skills don't die. Some families don't forget their purpose. Above them, the cleanup team began their assault on an empty ranch house. They didn't know they were about to face something far older and more dangerous than simple ranchers. They were about to face the Mason legacy. And 4 generations of preparation were more than ready for them. The elite operators swept through Sarah's house with textbook precision, each movement choreographed by years of training and combat experience. Their thermal imaging showed empty rooms. Their motion sensors detected no threats. Everything indicated a site hastily abandoned. In the command center below, Sarah watched them through dozens of hidden cameras. "They're good," she commented, studying their formation. "Moving in synchronized teams, covering every angle. Almost perfect technique." "Almost," Kane asked. "They're clearing the house exactly how they were trained, following patterns." She pointed to different monitors. "See how they check corners, standard CIA close quarters protocol. They're showing us who they work for." Philip studied the tactical team's movements. "How many?" 36 operators total. 4 8-man teams in the house, 1 covering the barn, 2 securing the perimeter. Sarah's smile was cold. "All of them exactly where we want them." The command center hummed with activity. Local deputies and SWAT team members manned different stations, each one previously trained by Sarah for this moment. Tom Riley coordinated their movements, years of sheriff's experience adapting smoothly to the underground facility. "Your father built all this?" Kane gestured to the sophisticated monitoring equipment. "Started with my grandfather, actually, back when the government first built the bunkers." Sarah checked weapon feeds, showing her cached arsenals still in place throughout the ranch. Each generation added more, improved the systems, waited for the day they'd be needed. On the monitors, the tactical teams began reporting in. "House clear, no contacts, moving to secondary structures." "They'll find the tunnel entrance in the barn soon," Phillips noted. "One of them," Sarah corrected. "The one we want them to find. Old entrance looks abandoned. They'll think they've got us cornered." Kane's eyes narrowed. "How many entrances are there really?" "Enough." Sarah turned to Tom. "Status on the locals?" "Bill Cooper's got 20 riders in position, all with clear lanes if we need them. Got another 30 spread through the high ground, watching the access roads." The sheriff smiled slightly. "Word got around. Lots of folks been waiting for this day." The tactical teams reached the barn, their movements still precise but showing growing frustration. They'd expected resistance, not this ghostly absence of targets. "Team 2, breach the entrance," their commander ordered. "Teams 3 and 4, establish containment. Everyone else maintain perimeter control." Sarah watched them prepare shaped charges for the reinforced door. They're about to get their first surprise. "Tom, signal Bill's people. Time to close the net." High in the surrounding ridges, local hunters and ranchers began moving into prepared positions, people who knew every fold of this land, who'd trained for years under Sarah's quiet guidance. "Found something," one of the tactical team leaders reported. "Tunnel complex, recently used, multiple tracks heading deeper in." "Pursue and contain," the commander ordered. "All teams, we are go for subsurface operation." Sarah's smile widened slightly. "They're committed now, running their playbook perfectly." She turned to the captured commander of the 1st Tactical Team. "This is usually where you'd spring your trap, isn't it? Catch them in the tunnels, no witnesses, no traces." The commander's expression remained professional, but his eyes showed new understanding. "You're not just defending, you're hunting." 4 generations of watching them operate, learning their methods. Sarah checked her Colt one final time. "Now we show them what that knowledge costs." The elite operators began their descent into the tunnel complex, their night vision equipment and thermal imaging providing false confidence. They moved in standard infiltration formation, exactly as their training demanded. "They'll find the first cache in 3 minutes," Sarah noted, watching their progress. "Weapons and equipment that'll confirm they're on the right track. Push them deeper in." Kane studied the tunnel network displayed on the main screen. "This is incredible. You've got the whole complex mapped. Every route they use, every hidden cache, and every trap we've prepared." Sarah nodded to Tom. "Start the sequence." Throughout the tunnel complex, hidden systems activated. Surveillance feeds showed the tactical teams advancing deeper, following the trail of breadcrumbs Sarah had left for them. "You're really going to take them all?" Phillips asked quietly. "These are elite operators, the best in the world. They're trained soldiers, following practice protocols." Sarah's voice held certainty earned through decades of preparation. "We're something else, something they've forgotten how to fight." The first team reached the weapons cache, finding exactly what their intelligence said would be there. Their commander ordered them deeper into the complex, pursuit overriding caution. "They think they're chasing ghosts," Sarah mused. "Never realize they're the ones being hunted." Kane checked his borrowed weapon. "What now?" "Now?" Sarah started, toward one of the hidden exits. "Now we remind them why some places shouldn't be disturbed, why some families pass down more than just land." The tactical teams moved deeper into the tunnels, their confidence growing with each carefully planted piece of evidence they found. They were the elite, the best trained operators in the world. They were about to learn that all their training meant nothing against generations of patience and preparation. The real hunt was about to begin. 2 miles beneath the Montana earth, the elite tactical teams moved through the tunnel complex with practiced efficiency. Their night vision equipment turned the darkness into stark green landscapes, every corner and shadow carefully checked and cleared. They never saw the first trap until it was too late. "Lost contact with Team 3, their commander reported suddenly. "No response on any channel." Sarah's voice echoed through the tunnels, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. 8 operators moving south through Section C. "Don't worry, they're alive, just sleeping. Might want to check your air sensors." The tactical teams immediately checked their equipment. Their readings showed clean air, no contaminants. "Your sensors are working perfectly," Sarah continued, her voice carrying professional amusement. "They're just reading what we want them to read, like everything else down here." In the command center, Kane watched the operators' confusion spread across multiple monitors. "You're in their heads now, making them doubt their training, making them doubt their equipment," Sarah corrected. "Elite operators rely on technology, on practiced protocols. Take those away." Another team went dark, their confident movement suddenly ending in synchronized collapse. "That's 16 of your people now," Sarah's voice echoed again. "Want to guess how many tunnels actually lead out of this complex? Here's a hint. It's not the number on your maps." The remaining teams switched to emergency protocols, adjusting their equipment, changing their tactics. But Sarah had spent years preparing for exactly these responses. "They're sealing their suits," Phillips observed. "Switching to internal air supply won't help." Sarah nodded to Tom, who activated another system. "Those suits are exactly what we wanted them to wear." On the monitors, the tactical team's thermal signatures began changing. Their sophisticated equipment started showing phantom readings, false signatures appearing and disappearing throughout the tunnels. "Getting multiple contacts," one operator reported, his professional calm cracking slightly. "Can't get clear readings." "Because everything you're seeing is a lie," Sarah's voice taunted. "Every sensor, every reading, every shadow. We've had years to prepare this place. Years to learn your protocols, your procedures, your weaknesses." Kane studied the tactical displays with growing appreciation. "You're not just beating them, you're dismantling them, taking away everything they rely on." "Making them fight blind," Sarah agreed, "while we see everything." The remaining operators had pulled back to defensive positions, trying to regroup and reassess. Their training was excellent, their adaptability impressive. but they were fighting against preparations laid down through generations. "Last chance," Sarah announced. "Surrender now. You all get to keep breathing. Stay, and we start playing rough." The tactical commander's response was immediate. "Alpha teams, fall back to position 1. Bravo teams, prepare for aggressive counterattack. We're taking the offensive." "Wrong choice." Sarah nodded to Tom. "Start the endgame." Throughout the tunnel complex, hidden systems activated. Walls that seemed solid became transparent. Corridors that appeared straight began subtle curves. Every piece of tactical training the operators relied on suddenly became a liability. "They're trying to reach their secondary exit," Phillips noted, watching the monitors. "There is no secondary exit," Sarah replied calmly. "Every route leads exactly where we want it to. Every choice brings them deeper into our territory." The tactical teams began taking casualties, not from gunfire, but from their own confusion. Elite operators crashed into walls that their equipment said weren't there, became separated by passages that seemed to change direction. "This is impossible," one team leader reported. "The whole complex is shifting." "Not shifting," Sarah corrected, her voice still echoing through their communications. "Just showing you what we want you to see. What we've spent years preparing. For you to see." Kane watched another team go dark. "How many ways out are there, really?" "One." Sarah checked her Colt. "And we're standing in it. Everything else is a trap. Every route leads here, to this room, to us." The remaining operators were converging now, being herded through carefully prepared corridors toward the command center. Their tactical formation had broken down, their sophisticated equipment worse than useless. "Final warning," Sarah announced. "You've lost half your teams, lost your tactical advantage, lost any chance of completing your mission. Surrender now, or we stop being nice." For a moment, silence filled the tunnel complex. Then the tactical commander's voice, strained but still professional. "Who are you people?" "Just ranchers," Sarah replied. "Protecting what's ours. Question is, are you professional enough to know when you're beaten? Or do we need to demonstrate further?" The command center's monitors showed the remaining operators conferring, checking their failing equipment, assessing their deteriorating situation. They were elite soldiers, trained to complete their missions at any cost, but they were also professionals, and professionals knew when a mission was compromised beyond salvation. "Stand down," the commander ordered finally. "All teams stand down." Sarah smiled slightly. "Wise choice." She turned to Tom. "Bring them in, carefully. Then we can have a long talk about who sent them and why." The hunt was over, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning, because somewhere above them, someone had authorized this mission. Someone had sent elite operators to eliminate witnesses and bury secrets. That someone was about to learn why the Mason name still carried weight in these mountains, and why some secrets refused to stay buried. 3 hours after the tactical team surrendered, a single black SUV approached the Mason ranch. Sarah watched its arrival from her porch, the morning sun finally breaking through the storm clouds. The vehicle's windows were tinted, its plates diplomatic, its very presence radiating authority. "Right on schedule," she murmured. Beside her, Kane shifted nervously. "You sure about this?" "He was always going to come himself," Sarah replied. "Men like him need to maintain control, need to see with their own eyes." The SUV stopped precisely at her front steps. The back door opened, revealing an elderly man in an impeccable suit. His movements were careful, deliberate, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. "Director Collins," Kane said quietly. "Head of Special Activities Division. My boss, or was, Sarah Mason." Collins's voice carried cultured authority. "I must admit, you've caused quite a situation here. 36 elite operators captured, classified operations exposed. Rather impressive for a simple rancher." Sarah's hand never strayed far from her Colt. "Nothing simple about these mountains, or the people who protect them." "Ah, yes. The Mason family legacy." Collins mounted the steps with measured grace. 4 generations of watching, waiting, gathering evidence of things that don't officially exist. "Like your secret tunnel network?" The one you've been using to move unauthorized weapons and technology? Collins smiled slightly. Unauthorized is such a limited term. There are necessary operations, Mrs. Mason. Things that happen in shadows so others can live in light. Things that violate every law and treaty we have, Kane interjected. Things that cross lines even the CIA won't touch. Agent Kane. Collins turned his attention to his former operative. Your commitment to uncovering corruption is admirable. Misguided, but admirable. Though I'm curious how you knew to investigate this region specifically. Kane's expression hardened. Because Sarah's father contacted me 2 years ago before he died, showed me evidence of what you were really doing out here. Thomas Mason. Collins nodded thoughtfully. A remarkable man. He spent decades documenting our activities, building this elaborate underground surveillance network, training his daughter to continue his work. Not just his daughter, Sarah corrected. The whole community, everyone you see around you. They've been preparing for this day, learning. Your roots, your methods, your weaknesses. As if to emphasize her point, rifle barrels glinted from distant ridges. Local hunters and ranchers, positioned to cover every approach. You're surrounded, Sarah continued. Your tactical teams are in custody. Your tunnel network is compromised. It's over. Collins's smile never wavered. Is it? You think capturing a few operators changes anything? There are levels of authority here you can't imagine. Powers that operate beyond conventional oversight. You mean like these? Sarah nodded to Tom Riley, who emerged from the house carrying a steel briefcase. 4 generations of evidence. Every illegal shipment, every unauthorized operation, every connection to powers that operate beyond oversight. For the first time, Collins's composed facade cracked slightly. You can't prove anything. These are matters of national security. National security? Kane laughed harshly. You've been selling classified technology to the highest bidders, using these tunnels to move weapons that shouldn't exist, all while building your own private empire. Everything I've done serves a greater purpose, Collins insisted. The world needs people willing to operate in shadows, to do what's necessary. No, Sarah's voice carried steel. The world needs people willing to stand in light, to face things head-on. She drew her Colt with practiced grace. People willing to protect what's right, no matter the cost. Collins's hand moved toward his jacket. You really think you can challenge the entire intelligence apparatus? One family against institutions that have existed for decades? Not one family. Sarah's smile was cold. Look around you. Every person you see is part of this. Every rifle aimed at your position represents generations of people you thought you could ignore, dismiss, control. As if on cue, vehicles began appearing on the surrounding roads. Local trucks and cars, each one carrying people who'd grown, tired of shadows and secrets in their mountains. Last chance, Sarah announced. Surrender now, face proper justice, or find out exactly how many people in these hills have been waiting for this moment. Collins studied the gathering force, his tactical mind assessing options, calculating odds. You'll never make it stick. There are procedures, protocols, ways to make evidence disappear. Maybe, Sarah's Colt never wavered, or maybe we've learned more from watching you than you realize. Maybe we've got evidence stored in places you'll never find, ready to release if anything happens to any of us. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating a scene Collins had never expected to face. Not just Sarah and her allies, but an entire community united against the shadows he represented. Your choice, Sarah said quietly, but choose carefully, because whatever happens next will be remembered, written down, added to the legacy of these mountains. Collins looked into her eyes and saw 4 generations of determination, saw the weight of a family's purpose passed down through years of patient preparation, and finally he understood what he was really facing. Not just a rancher with a gun, but a legacy of resistance against people like him, a community that had decided shadows and secrets had no place in their mountains. The real showdown was just beginning. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of federal agencies and classified briefings. Sarah watched from her porch as a parade of official vehicles transformed her quiet ranch into the center of a national security investigation. FBI, CIA, congressional oversight committees, all drawn by the evidence her family had spent generations gathering. Director Collins sat in custody in Tom Riley's department, his carefully maintained world crumbling as decades of secrets came to light. The tactical teams he'd sent were being processed by federal authorities, their very existence raising questions no one could easily answer. "You were right," Kane said, joining her on the porch with fresh coffee. "About all of it. The tunnels, the illegal shipments, the unauthorized operations. Collins was building his own private empire out here, using the mountain's isolation to hide things that shouldn't exist," Sarah agreed, "just like my father always suspected." Agent Phillips emerged from the house, his expression showing both exhaustion and amazement. "Just finished the initial evidence review. What your family documented? It's beyond anything we imagined. Weapons programs that violate international treaties. Technology that shouldn't exist for decades. 4 generations of watching," Sarah replied simply. 4 generations of waiting for the right moment. The sound of helicopters drew their attention, more federal agents arriving to secure the tunnel complex. But these were legitimate authorities, operating in daylight rather than shadows. "What happens now?" Kane asked. "Now the real work begins." Sarah sipped her coffee, making sure all of this comes to light, making sure no one else can use these mountains for their secret games. Tom Riley approached, looking oddly formal in his sheriff's uniform. "Just got word from the federal prosecutor. Collins is talking. Naming names. Seems he doesn't want to take the fall alone." Sarah nodded. It was inevitable. Men like Collins survived by knowing when to change sides. "The community's asking about the tunnels," Tom continued, "wanting to know if it's really over." "It's over," Sarah assured him. "No more shadows, no more secrets. These mountains belong to the people who live here. Always have." The morning sun painted the scene in shades of gold, highlighting the end of one era and the beginning of another. 4 generations of patience had finally paid off. The Mason legacy was complete. 1 month after Collins' arrest, Sarah sat in Bill Anderson's diner, watching her quiet town adapt to its new reality. The federal presence had finally diminished, leaving behind a changed community, not just a sleepy ranching town anymore, but a place that had faced down one of the most powerful shadow organizations in the country. "They're calling it the Montana Underground," Bill said, refilling her coffee. "Congressional hearings started yesterday. Your father's evidence is causing quite a stir in Washington." Sarah nodded, thinking of the generations of careful documentation. He always said the truth would come out eventually. Just had to be patient. The diner's door chimed as Kane entered, looking more relaxed in civilian clothes. His role in the investigation had earned him a promotion rather than the punishment Collins had intended. "Just got back from D.C., he announced, sliding into the booth. "You'll be happy to know the tunnel network is being officially decommissioned. No more secrets under these mountains." "What about the technology they moved through here?" Sarah asked. "The weapons?" "Being traced. Some of it's already led to arrests in 3 countries. Kane smiled slightly. "Your family's evidence is unraveling decades of illegal operations. Collins was just the start." Through the window, Sarah watched locals and tourists mingle on the street. The town's story had attracted attention, but not the kind that destroyed communities. Instead, it had brought a new sense of pride. These people had stood together against corruption, had protected their mountains from those who would misuse them. Tom Riley joined them, carrying fresh files. Got the final report from the FBI. They're formally recognizing the Mason family's role in the investigation. 4 generations of service to the country. "We were just protecting what was ours," Sarah said quietly. "Same as anyone would." "No," Kane corrected. "What your family did was extraordinary. You didn't just watch and wait. You built a community that was ready to stand together when the moment came." Bill nodded in agreement. "People around here always knew the Masons were special. Now we know why." Sarah thought about her father, about his careful preparation and patient documentation. about the legacy he'd passed down, not just to her, but to the entire community. "The mountains are clean now," she said finally. "No more shadows, no more secrets, just people living their lives in the open." Kane raised his coffee cup. "To the Mason legacy." "To the truth," Sarah corrected, joining the toast. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, painting everything in clear, honest light, just the way it should be. Sarah stood on her porch in the early morning light, just as she had the night Kane's crew first arrived. Her father's old coffee cup warmed her hands as she surveyed the land that 4 generations of Masons had protected. The mountains stood, unchanged, eternal sentinels watching over the valley, but everything else had transformed. No more hidden tunnels beneath the surface, no more shadows lurking in deep places. The truth had finally emerged into daylight. Her Colt still rested comfortably at her hip. Some habits didn't change, but its purpose had shifted from guarding secrets to protecting something more precious, the open, honest peace her family had spent generations fighting to achieve. In town, they still told stories about the night the Mason legacy was revealed, about how a quiet rancher and her community had stood against forces that thought themselves untouchable. But Sarah knew the real story wasn't about gunfights or secret tunnels. It was about patience, about standing firm for what was right, about a family's unwavering determination to protect their home, their mountains, and their truth. Some stories, she realized, never really end. They just change shape, like the mountains themselves, enduring through generations. And that was exactly as it should be.